Hi, my name is Lauren Hextall, and I'm with Blackpoint Cyber. I want to thank the All Mountain Tech team for having me on today, and for all of you for joining for the second session in our cybersecurity webinar series. The focus of this series today, this episode of today's series, is business email compromise and protecting the cloud. We want to break this down into really digestible concepts so that this isn't such a mystical arena, and that you have the tools and resources to understand the landscape that you're living in, and also make actionable steps to better your security posture. So let's start out for where this all begins from our perspective, and that is with John Murchison. John is our founder and CEO, and he spent 12 years with the NSA performing high priority missions for the US government. Essentially, John was a hacker for the right team. So with that, we have a really strong understanding of how that offensive side of cybersecurity works so that we can build the best defenses. And this applies not only to protecting the infrastructure and environment that we work in, but also protecting the cloud. The solutions that we've built today are really driven by John and the board of directors. And if you were here for part one of this series, you will have seen these faces. So I won't spend too much time here, but I want to show you this again to really give you the scope of support and minds that have gone towards solutions to protect this infrastructure. And these are solutions that scale up to that enterprise level, but are really built with medium and small businesses in mind, because the issues and problems that large businesses face that operate in the cloud also apply to small and medium businesses. So I really think it's important before we get any deeper in here to really address what is the cloud. If you're anything like me, when I entered this sort of world, I had no idea. It seemed very mystical to mean that we could access data via our computer that lived somewhere in the world, uh, somewhere in the cloud. So I think the best way to really look at the cloud is look at what it's not. So the cloud evolved as a sort of a next step to, our on-premise infrastructure. When we look at on-premise infrastructure, we think about all of the components to that. That is the hardware that's in place that allows it to run. That's the networking that connects all of it, the utilities put in place to make it functional, and the ongoing support and maintenance required so that all of that can continue. So the cloud came about as an alternative of hosting technology on premise, just as we've outlined. And if you think about the minimum on-prem infrastructure required to support small and medium businesses, from your servers to your networking devices, your utilities, it requires an upfront investment and the effort of businesses to implement, which means the slower adoption. And it doesn't end there. Not only do you have to implement this technology, you also have to put resources and skilled technicians and engineers into supporting and keeping up with maintenance. So pre-cloud era, the era where service providers offered hosted services for this type of infrastructure, and some still exist today, big tech companies said to themselves that, there are challenges here that are facing organizations. And so they really demanded an alternative for a hosted service that was web-based. So these web-based applications have continued to grow. Now, when we look at this infrastructure, it's still there. It's just not our responsibility to implement and build out. That's really on the cloud provider to build the hardware, the networking utilities, provide that support so that you can use it. And we look at this as sort of now it's uh, the responsibility for that underlying infrastructure has shifted. No longer something that you would build and construct within your own office. It's now within the cloud. And that responsibility, uh, depending on the type of service you're used, exists for both the end customer and now the cloud provider. And so there are a lot of benefits to that. And let's look at those benefits and then also look at, maybe why they're not so great. So onto why it's great. There is that shared responsibility model. You are no longer responsible for implementing the technology, networking it together, making sure it runs, um, making sure that that is able to support your business. That is the responsibility of your cloud provider. Your responsibility, on the other hand, we'll get to. Now, your and that does require some talent. So, let's get ahead of ourselves. The responsibility, that shared responsibility means that, you're now responsible for the security. So in this, while the cloud provider is generally responsible for, keeping the underlying cloud platform afloat, you as the consumer of that platform are responsible for the security. And that requires a lot of talent to not only make the physical changes, but also to know what to fix. Um, another, and so that's how you want to think about it. It's not just you get to step away from all responsibility, but your responsibility is reduced. So you could say that's a pro. The other pro is you get the latest technology. The cloud is growing and adapting and evolving, and we get access to that by being a sort of a purchaser of the cloud infrastructure, and we get to outsource a big part of that responsibility back to that initial slide of the initial build. So there are really great things that come with the cloud, but the shared responsibility is where we have to look at the risk. And right out of the box, it's not necessarily configured correctly. Misconfiguration services can potentially place the entire cloud tenant at risk. For example, misconfiguration of security groups allow unauthorized access to applications and services. Functionality changes quickly in the cloud, so businesses have to quickly test and employ new services. There are vulnerabilities that are widely known, and they're publicly known because, as I've mentioned, it's your responsibility to stay up to tune and tune this for security. So we have to be noted. We have to announce the vulnerabilities. We have to make that known. So the company that's purchasing that software can tune it and get it up to speed for the latest threat. What does that also do? It exposes that threat to the public so the hacker can take advantage of that as well. So the pros and cons. Yes, you don't have to build out the entire infrastructure. You don't have to support all of that technology in terms of getting it in place, setting up the network so it's functional. But you do have to make sure it's configured to your specific needs and you are secure. So when we look at how we go about securing this infrastructure, we're not left blind. There are a lot of resources out there to guide us, and where we turn to is really to step outside of ourselves and to look to a framework that is both vetted by government and industry. And the reference we're going to look at today is NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. We like this NIST because it is a collaboration of government and the folks that are using it in the wild to come up with very tangible ways of viewing security that is not just putting on an additional layer, but looking at the aspects that really hold up the table. So think about NIST as those legs to the table, and what we're trying to hold up is our cloud infrastructure. And that has 5 different categories here. The first 4 are the investments and efforts that we make to keep us from becoming right of boom. Right of boom is post breach. It's post business email compromise. It's post attack. So we want to do everything we can to stay on that left hand side. That first category is asset identification. Know what you have. What is the cloud infrastructure you're working with? Who are the user accounts involved? Who do I have to protect? You have to know what you have if you're going to actually build a defense around it. The second category here is harden your infrastructure. Think about this as hygiene and configuration. In that shared responsibility model, we mentioned that it is no longer your responsibility to build out the infrastructure, but it is your responsibility to configure, tune, and keep it secure based on the way that your business uses that space. Another component of your hardening your infrastructure is also using MFA. And as I alluded to at the beginning, it can be compromised, and we're going to show you how, but it's still a critical part of keeping yourself in reducing your attack surface to as little as possible. So once we've set our configuration to how we want it to be, we've tightened the box, we've reduced the attack surface, we also have to put detections in place to catch anything that was able to weasel its way through. our detections have to be applicable to the possible levels of compromise in the cloud, and then it has to be followed up by a real-time response. A response that can act when we've triggered an alert that there is a compromise that has happened. That's not enough. We need to be able to act on that. And that as a collaborative effort is going to keep us left at boom, or that is the hope. But we have to have plans in place for the dark day that might happen when we become right of boom. The goal to recover, and that would be your backups. That would also be your insurance. Anything that's about getting up and continuing on would be in that category. So I think let's recap here. The model of the cloud has a lot of benefits. It has some risk in its configuration and the access to that space. And we have a framework like this to help us ground those concepts into concrete steps that we can take to better our security posture. And this is extremely necessary. And we really have some data to back that up. Um, these are a few figures that we've gotten, reporting from the FBI in email compromise that has been self-reported. So we have to understand that there is considerably more monetary losses and quantity of these attacks than we have record of. But between June 2016 and December 2021, there's recorded losses of $43 billion. And that is to anybody a significant figure. But if we even look at this more closely, we see that there's a 65% increase in this from July 2019 to December 2021. And, as we allude to in the next line, what happened in that big shift? What was the change? COVID was the change. We all shifted to a remote work life where we were accessing data from our home computers or outside of the office firewall. We were working in this cloud that was new to us, and we were still figuring out how to navigate and configure. So that big increase is, I guess, somewhat predictable. We also see an increased use of cryptocurrency. I think we'd have to have our head in the sand a bit if we haven't, heard cryptocurrency on the news and, the FTX compromise and all of those businesses. But, that is the currency of the ransomware gangs that we're up against. So an increased use in that currency also translates to this arena. The monetary losses that come from business email compromise, there isn't an extreme monetary gain to those adversaries, and they're using crypto. So we know that there are losses. We know that there are gaps in the cloud security. How do we actually make that connection? How is it breached? And that's what I'm going to spend some time on next. I'm going to show you both two types of attacks that compromise MFA. There are two types. One is the more common automated attack, and that is a brute force attack. Attacker attempts to get their way into account by using a script to guess the name of the username and the password. It's really a numbers game. They can run through that script as many times as they want because it's automated. There's no human behind it, and eventually they'll find something that works. Now, the other type of attack is a phishing attack. Now, this is something we're probably all pretty familiar with. We're exploiting a human rather than performing a script in order to get that successful login. We're going to trick a user to give up their credentials. And what I'm going to show you next is really a breakdown of that. And this is through a video that we've created. Now, we've created this video to simulate an attack. And we did this through our AP2 group, our adversary pursuit group, who wanted to make this a really tangible story. So we've recorded it for you, and I'm going to walk you through the aspects of what's going on. So let's begin here. Okay, so you should see this Blackpoint logo going live. We are walking through the attack. Now, you're going to view this from two different perspectives. You're going to view it from the malicious web server. So this is our attacker, so that you can see what's going on behind the scenes. And then we're going to show you what it looks like to the end user. So we're pulling off this attack using something called Evil Jinx. That they're creating fishlets to mimic a website. The website in question today is going to be the Microsoft Office 365 account. And you'll see us setting this up. We're looking for the hostname office.co.uk. Legitimate site. Our adversary pursuit group was working out of England at the time, so this made the most sense. But this is the attack we're looking to do. And you're seeing sort of the foundation of that from the attacker's computer. And we're really just prepping this attack to log into this account. We'll just let him type away here. And then we're going to switch here to the email that we're going to be sending out. So again, I told you this was a phishing attempt. So that means that we are sending out bait to an email so that in hopes that someone clicks our link and that we can then intercept that traffic. So you'll see here that this is coming from John at Blackpoint Cyber, or it's built to look like it's coming from John at Blackpoint Cyber. This is our CEO, and it's going to Dave. Let's assume this is an employee within our organization. It's saying, hey, Dave, I need you to look at this document. We've just come up with this for APG. We need you to review it as quickly as possible, and it's for a big client. So there's a lot of urgency behind that, which is pretty typical to these phishing attacks. They want you to think quickly. They want you to click and perform the action without the forethought to see those indicators of compromise that you're about to see on the victim's device. All right, we're getting in there. That email is being sent and it is arriving in Dave's inbox. So you'll see here a couple of things. You'll see that it looks like a standard email address. Yeah, there's a notice saying that it's coming from outside of the organization, but I'm seeing John's email. I'm seeing the urgency. I'm seeing the link. I'm going to go ahead and click on that link. I'm probably assuming that it's linked to a SharePoint site, as most documents are when shared within our organization. And from this page, I would assume that as well. It's asking me to sign back into Microsoft, which, all right, I'm going to do. I need to view this document. Now, before we do that, I want to point out a couple of very key details. Now, you see here in the browser, it says https login office.co.uk, or does it? Look a little closer. It actually says login.office with a 1 that has replaced the I, ce.co.uk. Now that's a very subtle change, but it is very significant. What's actually happened here is that to create this video, we just bought the domain. We bought the domain that says office1.co.uk. We now own that, and through our fishlets, we're able to mimic the appearance and functionality of the Microsoft account. I think it cost about $30 to make that domain and some technical knowledge to set this up, but overall, a low lift to get into an account. So I'm Dave. I'm in a hurry. I'm logging in to this account. It looks like Microsoft. Why would I think it wasn't? I'm certainly not giving that domain a lot of scrutiny. All right, so I'm logging in. Put in my email address. I'm also going to put in my password, as is expected. And then, of course, I have MFA set up, so I'm being asked to authenticate into the account, and I'm going to approve it. And now I have authenticated that account, and I've asked to stay signed in. And look, I have accessed the Microsoft site, or so I thought I had. Now, I know this looks really convincing, and that's because it is really convincing, but this is not a legitimate Microsoft site. This is the site that we have been tricked into by our attacker. Now, what you're going to see now is what was happening on the back end. So as you were logging into the computer, you were putting in your credentials and password, these were being intercepted. And that's why we call this a man-in-the-middle attack. We see that we have both the username and password. We did a few lines up here, but what we've also captured is the the MFA cookie that authenticated into the account. So now we can grab this cookie and use this as a way into the account versus going through the traditional method of adding in the password and prompting another MFA request. Now, you use cookies all the time. You may not know it, but this is how websites, know that we've visited a site. They're able to store our passwords. They're able to, really track us, our activity through the web is through these cookies. So you'll see in the top bar, you have a collection of cookies on the device. And instead of logging in traditionally, I'm going to input the cookie that I copied from that page earlier into this and then hit refresh. And now would you look at that? I am in the legitimate Microsoft account, Office spelt with an I, not a one.com, because I have the legitimate credentials from the login that I was able to intercept. And I have the authentication cookie that I was able to use to access the legitimate site. Now, that was extremely convincing. And, I'm sure on a busy day of work, I would fall for that. So, we can do all of the training in the world and encourage our users to have some awareness, but these attacks have become very sophisticated. So we have to think about, other steps and measures that we can take as a next line of defense. This was not set up to scare you, but to really, press the point home of how convincing these attacks are, how simple it is to pull off, and the resources that our hackers have access to. The next attack that I wanted to show you was actually a case study of a real instance of this happening. So I mentioned, that video we had created to demonstrate an attack that we see all the time, being that man in the middle phishing attempt. But I mentioned there's also the automated attack that's more of a brute force attempt. And we see these all the time. We see them used to access, accounts every day of the week. Both with small and medium businesses, but we also see this on the highest level of security breaches. Our adversary pursuit group that I mentioned that does our research into development of building and harden techniques to our agents and our security operations team put together this case study as a really interesting example. So this particular group had what we call the legacy authenticator access allowed. And this is a hygiene setting that we won't go into the specifics of today, but it was a configuration that was not set to best practices and allowed the compromise of MFA in this particular instance. And this was really interesting because we caught a nation state actor. So this is, a national hacking organization attempting to target a particular group of people's 365 account. So the interesting thing here is that all of the users that had this compromise occur had just attended a conference with heads of state. And every conference attendee had a successful malicious login. And we saw a trend in these logins that we're pointing out today. We saw this in the user agent string. And this is really telling to know that this was a brute force attempt. Typically, when we see a traditional login, it's you for your business logging into an account, we would expect that user agent string to read as a traditional browser. Would it be Firefox? Would it be Mozilla? Anything that was standard? That's what we'd expect to see. For this particular instance, the commonality was how unique this user agent string was. We saw it as a Python request. Now, stay with me here. This comes to that original premise of using a script to attempt to log into an account. Rather than writing a focused attempt to compromise one individual account, we use technology like a script like this to make continuous attempts to brute force our way into that account. It's not one browser, it's continuous through this script. And that is identified as the Python string. And it's detections like this that give us the context of how that login is being occurred. Is it coming from an expected source? Is it coming from the country we'd expect it to? Is it coming from a device that we've seen before? Is that IP address recognizable? Are they coming in via a proxy using VPN? Or are they logging in with a traditional browser? Or are we seeing a script in place like this instance? It's those really nuanced indicators that allow us to understand the intrusion of the 365 space. And I think what's important here is to understand back to that shared responsibility model. The cloud provider is providing you the infrastructure. You, the user, are there to configure it and to reduce your attack service, to have the best hygiene, to use MFA. And then you push some of that responsibility over to a company like All Mountain Tech and Blackpoint that really understand where the compromise can happen and are there to intercept it and provide that real-time response should it occur, like we demonstrated in that case study. And so, of course, part of our infrastructure is protecting that cloud, and we do have products to support it, and the products that were used in that real case study we just demonstrated. But how else can we protect it? Again, you're hardening your infrastructure, you're getting 24/7 monitoring, and you're understanding that shared responsibility model. A lot of the parts that are that are your responsibility, meaning that configuration, that hardening, is free information. So the Center for Internet Security has Microsoft 365 foundational benchmarks that say, this is what it should be. This is where we'd like to see you aligned and configured to best practices. It's up to your responsibility to make that happen, but here are the resources to help you do that. And if I can give you some takeaways for this, it is to look into your part in your cloud security and make sure that you are configured to those best practices and that you're taking in place some steps to increase your security, whether you go first to 24/7 active monitoring. Obviously, that's best. But the smaller parts are really essential too. Reducing that attack surface, using MFA, and understanding your role in that shared responsibility model. The last part of this is that you're looking at both the security on the cloud and the endpoint with equal consideration. The cloud is accessed from somewhere. Where is it accessed? The endpoints. Those are your doors into the cloud. Those can also be compromised. We need to think about protections that succinctly and elegantly tie those two pieces of the puzzle together and approach them with equal consideration. The cloud is a new space relatively, given the world that we're in, and it's getting more and more attention, both by firms like ourselves and All Mountain Tech that set out to protect it, but also by adversaries. So not only should we protect our devices because that is still an attack and risk vector, but we need to bring that same awareness to the cloud. And I hope that we have done that for you today. My intention is not to scare you into clicking on anything in your inbox or for throwing away your MFA because it can be failed, but instead to bring some awareness to how you're operating in the cloud, how it's configured and what your responsibility is in that, and also to reduce your attack service with tools like MFA. Yes, they're failable, but they're not a wasted effort. You see, the effort that the adversary had to go through to get to that point. They had to build a domain, they had to target specifically, or they had to build a user agent string that's targeting those accounts. All of that is so much more difficult if you have MFA in place. So I'll conclude with this. If you have questions on the content today, please reach out to the All Mountain Tech team. We're happy to take questions and show you a full demo of how we operate and also provide some more education around your cloud security. And that's a really great first step. So thank you for your time, and I hope you'll be here for our third session. This will be in January, and this particular session is, I think, the one I'm most excited for. We're going to be unpacking ransomware gangs, how they operate, who they are, and really sort of take away the illusion behind those gangs to really see them as the profitable bodies that they are, that are really taking advantage of business owners like yourself. So take a peek out in your inbox for an invitation for that one, and we'll see you in January. Thank you.